Good. Well, as Doug was saying, over the last while, you've been thinking quite a bit at church about this subject of discipleship, and that's why, obviously, we're dealing with it this weekend. The elders have been working through a book which is all about focusing church life around the priorities that Jesus gives us. Not what we might choose, but Jesus' priorities for church life, which are focused in on how we become a community of people who walk in the footsteps of Jesus, so that we can learn to be more like him. So what we're going to be looking at today is what I call Discipleship 101. So here are some of the basic things that Jesus taught his disciples, even before they sent them out on mission. So this is what he was teaching them and are his priorities for us too. So let me read you just the first couple of verses of Matthew chapter 5. And if you've got a Bible, do please keep it open. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. I don't know how you picture the scene, and to some extent, the translations set it up for us, because the language of he went up on a mountainside could just mean he went into the hills, into the hill country. The picture could be that Jesus saw the crowds because he'd been really doing so many healing miracles. He'd become tremendously popular. Read that at the end of chapter 4, people who are ill, various diseases and pains and demon-possessed, and he healed them all. So large crowds from all over the area were following him. And Jesus, when he saw the crowds, went into the hills and sat down, and his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. The picture could be that Jesus has actually gone away from the crowds with his disciples. The way the NIV takes it, and that's perfectly legitimate as well, because we just don't know, is that he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he taught them with the crowds listening in. And I tend to think that is the scene, that Jesus is principally teaching his disciples with anybody else who wanted listening in. And I think that's a good picture of what we can do week by week, because principally our responsibility is to make disciples, to teach those who are wanting to follow Jesus. And of course, we're only too pleased if other people come and listen in, but it would be strange, wouldn't it, if you have somebody new come and you sort of change the message and think, I'm going to target that one person rather than the people who are here. Whereas what we really want to do is to see what Jesus is doing, which was that he cared for the crowds. He had compassion on the crowds. Of course he did. And so he taught his disciples. Because Jesus' whole approach was that he wanted to take some men, just this group of 12 men, to see them following in his footsteps and then to send them out to make disciples, to do what he had been doing, because this was how to bring the good news to the ends of the earth till the ends of the age. You see, Jesus is not superficial. He's like his Father. He's prepared to take time patiently with a few to teach them so that they are different, so that they could do what Doug was reading that Jesus' disciples would have to face. It was so that people like Corrie and Betsy Ten Boom could face awful challenges. You know, it's awe-inspiring, isn't it, to see what they faced. And I know many of us would think, how could I possibly do that? And one of the things I remember from reading those books years and years ago. It was just a lovely picture where I think it was probably Betsy and Corey again talking about how, when we were children and we were going to the train, Dad looked after the tickets until we got there, and then he gave us them to get onto the train. Our Father will give us what we need when we need it. Let's trust him. But in the meantime, let him teach us so that we will become the people who will be able to live for him and respond even to those sorts of circumstances. And it's way beyond me, I know that. I don't have what it takes. But whatever we are going to face in the race that's marked out for us, he will give us what we need. Jesus focused not on the crowds, but on his disciples, though of course he wanted the crowds to come into the goodness of this good news too. So that might be enough. That could be do for this morning's sermon, wouldn't it? I think that's we've got enough to chew on. But let me share some of the teaching that Jesus gave, because it's all about this issue of being learners of Jesus. You remember our D plate from last night, the Welsh one of them. It's being learners, followers of Jesus, disciples. And the Sermon on the Mount, as we call it, the sermon up in the Highlands, was the first of these 5 blocks of talk that Matthew records for us. Whether Jesus delivered these as separate talks on each occasion, which he may well have done, and you've got the summary of it, or whether Matthew has brought together Jesus' teaching into these settings, that really doesn't matter. This is the core teaching that Jesus was giving to his disciples. And Matthew, in fulfilling this Great Commission, was teaching the next generation of people all the things Jesus had commanded them. So this is Jesus' core curriculum for discipleship. Let me read Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 to 12. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." You know, when we read this word blessed, or if you say it in the proper old way, blessed, it really sounds quite a religious word, doesn't it? And maybe a bit twee, oh bless. You know, you can get that sense of bless. We can seem very holy as we bless one another. But actually, I think whenever you read the word blessed, think best. Because this is the best way of life. This is the way, the word could even be translated happy. This is the good life. This is the best life that Jesus is talking about it, even though it doesn't look like it at first. Especially when you get that bit at the end about being persecuted. And then he rubs it in with the extra couple of verses. But what I think we need to hold on to here is that it's the outcomes that show how blessed we are. As we face these various difficulties, the realities of ourselves. It's the outcome that shows that we're in the best place, because the outcomes are guaranteed by God. This is God's best for us. So we can live in hope. It's not a matter of focusing in on what's happening right now. It's focusing on what God is doing in us through this for our eternal good. Hope is faith for future grace, that Father will give us what we need and he will get us there. So what does the blessed life look like now, and what will that mean for us in the future? So here it is. Just thinking for a minute or two about God's best life now and then in the future. First of all, Jesus talks about being poor in spirit. And I think it's helpful to think of what the opposite of something is if you want to get the idea of what it means to be poor in spirit. The opposite that the Bible gives us is being haughty in spirit. Having so much of ourselves, being full of ourselves, rather than being poor in spirit, recognizing I'm not all that great, recognizing our spiritual bankruptcy, recognizing, I've got lots of faults and failings. Being poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. God's kingly reign and everything that goes with it belongs to those who realize we just don't deserve it. We haven't got what it takes. We're poor in spirit. And then at the end of the Beatitudes, because that's what they're often called, Billy Graham used to call it the beautiful attitudes, the Beatitudes, this blessed life, the best life. You see again this phrase, the kingdom of heaven is there. So everything in God's royal kingdom belongs to these people. That's why this is the blessed life, the best life. And those bookends give us this idea of what Jesus is teaching. So blessed are those who are poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, who grieve over their own spiritual bankruptcy, but who mourn over the sad state of the world, as well as, obviously, it applies when we go through personal grief and lose a loved one. So it's quite appropriate to minister this in the context of a funeral, but it's bigger. Those who mourn over the sad state of the world that we live in, and death is just one of those symptoms that this is not how life is meant to be. That's why God said, the day you eat of it, you'll die. Everything went wrong. But they will be comforted because our Heavenly Father cares for those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. That's a word that we maybe don't think about too often, and certainly don't use. It means gentle and humble. It has the idea not so much of weakness, but it's used, for example, of a war horse that is under perfect control. It's all those big, strong horses at the coronation parade, and that they're on parade, but they're under control. That's the idea of meekness, strength that is under control, because of course a truly strong person is able to be gentle, aren't they? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, or inherit the land, everything in God's kingly reign. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who really want things to be right rather than how they are just now, who want God's kingdom to come, his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, for all that's wrong to be put right, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, for they will be filled. This is not an empty hope. This is something that we can hold on to. Blessed are the merciful, for they will obtain mercy. God will be merciful to those who themselves are showing mercy. And indeed, Jesus makes it quite clear, if we don't forgive people, we won't be forgiven. That's why, again, that story that Doug read to us is just so powerful. I actually love the way Corrie ten Boom writes, because, she really is a heroine. But Betsy's the real hero. So she's able to bring out, even she who is quite out of this world, but bringing out, in contrast, just what true Christianity is, that we might aspire to that. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So easy, isn't it, when people have hurt us, to allow that to just settle there and to burn up and just destroy. Whereas Jesus' way is to be merciful. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they will see God. What a privilege to look forward to. An incentive to be pure in heart. We're going to come back to that in just a few minutes. And blessed are the peacemakers. Not the peacekeepers, peace at any price, but those who are prepared to make peace, whatever the cost, because they will be called God's children. This is how God's family likeness is seen as we enter into places of pain, where there's struggles. It might be in a family, it might be in a work situation, but we have a message and ministry of reconciliation. Blessed are the peacemakers. You see, gospel preaching can't just be, you've got to, you're a sinner, you've got to turn to Jesus and you'll be forgiven. It's about entering into this as a whole life, that God has gone to this extent of the cross to make peace with us. So whatever the cost to us, and that might be the cost to our reputation as much as anything else, we're here to help people come into a place of peace with God and peace with one another. And we'll be misunderstood, and we will be persecuted, and we will be got at. And as Doug has indicated, it may not be too long before particularly church leaders are going to get it in the neck in our country by aiming to be faithful to Jesus. And I wouldn't be at all surprised, as a Scot living in England, if Scots might be in the forefront of this, just because of the political make-up. That's not about nationalism, it's about the moral underlying things that we are facing. So we need to pray, perhaps as never before, for those who govern us, that we may be able to live peaceable lives and continue to preach Jesus. But if we are taken up before the judges into those times of trial, that God will use them and use particularly church leaders to be faithful to Jesus. We may face opportunities that we'd rather not, but yet, in our weakness, his genuine work of grace in his people may be put on display to a watching world. Now, it's worth thinking, and I would suggest you might want to meditate on this. How are these attributes, these beautiful attitudes, seen in Jesus? And how can they be shown in us? I think one of the things that we need to do, and again, it's something that we try to model corporately on a Sunday morning. We come together around the Lord's table to think about Jesus. And that's what we want to do day by day. Spend time thinking about Jesus, who he is, so that the more that we reflect on him, the more we will reflect him. Do you see the picture? It's not something that this doesn't just happen. It's all about seeing Jesus, loving Jesus, valuing Jesus, and longing to be more like him. And we need the help of one another to do that, the encouragement of one another to do that. We all need this. That's why it's so important. Whether we're young or old, whether we're men or women, we come together to share what God is doing in our lives, to share what we're seeing of Jesus. It's quite different from teaching and having authority. It's praying, it's praising, it's sharing, as Doug has shared today out of a book, something we've read, something that we've discovered about Jesus. And your part matters, because we need to build one another up to love Jesus. And the more we love him, the more we'll want to be like him. Just some thoughts on how does this show in Jesus, because of course he had every right to be full of himself. He was perfect. He didn't have any of our faults and failings, but he was rich beyond all splendor with everything, and left heaven's glory to take the place of a servant, being humble, poor in spirit. Even though he could have been full of himself, he just wasn't. He mourned over all of the things, the sadnesses that he saw in life. He wept at Lazarus' grave. He was the ultimate meek one, which is not weak, but all power, channeled in gentle grace, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, for God's kingdom to be coming in the lives of others. Merciful. Remember the woman caught in adultery? Of course, they didn't bother about the man, they let him off. But Jesus, rather than condemning her, had compassion and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go away and leave your life of sin." He was merciful, pure in heart, the ultimate purity, the ultimate peacemaker, making peace by the blood of the cross, persecuted for righteousness' sake. It was only because he was so good that they wanted to get rid of him. So how do we become salt and light? Final 3 or 4 verses. You are the salt of the earth, verse 13. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds, your beautiful works, and glorify your Father in heaven. Salt and light. Salt makes a difference. That's the whole point of adding salt to your food. You've got to watch you don't put too much on, but all that sort of stuff. Make the dietary comment as well. Everything comes with a health warning these days, doesn't it? But salt makes a difference. It stops the rot. It was used as a preservative before they had fridges. You rubbed salt in so that the meat would stay edible for a while longer, and it adds flavour. That's the idea of salt. You, Jesus says to his followers, are the salt of the earth. But if you don't taste difference, if you don't make a difference, well, it's not worth having, so it's thrown out and trodden underfoot. You are the light of the world. A light mustn't be covered up. Jesus' picture of lighting a lamp and then putting a bowl over it, so that the light doesn't shine. It's pointless, isn't it? And obviously the lights that they had, which would have been burning a wee oil lamp type thing, it would just go out because it would have no oxygen. It mustn't be covered up. It should be like a city set in a hill. It'll stand out and shine out so that other people get the light too. Do you see the idea of salt and light? So that we can be the good news that Jesus is working in us for the sake of others. Jesus was not unmindful of the crowds, but the way for people to be changed is one at a time, as the light shines through us, as the salt gets out of the salt cellar and is there in the world. Let your light shine before people so that they will see your good deeds and glorify your Father who is in heaven, because they'll realize if we're humble and poor in spirit, we'll make it perfectly clear this is not about us. It's about how God can take perfectly ordinary people with all their faults and failings and make us different to make a difference. So how does this tie in with what we read about in chapter 6? I won't read these verses, but you can read them yourself. Jesus says, just the first verse, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness," or some versions put it, your piety, in front of others to be seen by them. "If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Light of the world, don't cover it up. Not doing things so that you'll be seen. What's Jesus saying? And obviously Jesus does this quite a lot. He puts things together to make us think, because there's something really important here. And he talks about this in three ways. They're just examples: giving to the poor, prayer, and fasting. And you can read what Jesus says there. So what's Jesus getting at? I would suggest it's all about doing things for the wrong reasons. And Jesus is just being practical here. He knows what we're like and how easy it is to become just like the scribes and the Pharisees of his own day. They were, we tend to think, Pharisees, boo, hiss. But they're not actually the pantomime villains. They're the good guys. They were trying to get things right. They would be perfectly happy in most brethren assemblies. Because that's folk who are trying to get things right, but actually they got it wrong at a fundamental level. And it's not because they weren't trying. And I'm sure, although Jesus had harsh things to say, he had a great compassion for these religious people. And he wants to help us to learn not to be like that, doing things for the wrong reasons, to look good to other people, to look religious to other people. If that's what we do, then you've got all the reward you're going to get. Other people think, oh, what a wonderful prayer he is, or what a gorgeous Christian she is. It's, that, if we're doing it for the wrong reason, that's it, that's all you get. But if we give and pray and fast, or whatever we're doing secretly, for Father's eyes only, then he will reward. And let's not play this down. Jesus says there is a reward for this. We have this future to look forward to. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. God's kingly reign is ours. He will reward good and faithful servant. Come on in to the joy of your master. And what is in the inside will come out. Salt must taste salty. And we can't make ourselves salty. It's only as we get a taste for Jesus that taste becomes part of what we are. It's as we really value him and want to be like him, to reflect him, that we can become like him. Light is not just decorated darkness dressed up to make it look good. It's something that is different. It shines out in contrast to the darkness around us. And Jesus very often warns about play acting, hypocrisy. And it's too easy. I know. It's too easy just to play the part, to act, as though this is true, rather than recognizing we just don't have what it takes. But what Jesus wants us to be is single-minded. Like Minions. This one helps us to see what Jesus is talking about. Here it is. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, what Jesus is actually saying is if your eye is single, quite literally, in focus, your eyes are in focus, your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, and it has overtones of stinginess, whereas the single eye has overtones of generosity. There are all sorts of concepts bound up in the words. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one or love the other. You'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and, quite literally, mammon. Money and the things that it can buy. Money is a good servant, but it's a bad master. And Jesus wants us to get our focus clear, to be single-minded, to have eyes for what our Heavenly Father wants, so that the light within us will be great. It won't be darkness because our eyes are out of focus. That's why he wants us to be pure in heart. He wants us to keep our eyes clearly focused on the goal of godliness. And we're going to think about that later in the day. It's not play acting. That's hypocrisy. It's being single-minded. Keep the picture. We need to work that out for ourselves. But we do it together. All of you. It's quite interesting, actually, to work through the singular and the plural in the Sermon on the Mount. By the way, you don't need to be an expert in Greek to know the singulars and the plurals. Because it is quite important to know, when is Jesus saying you as an individual, and when is he saying you all? Do you know what you need? You need a King James version of the Bible. Because that's the easiest way to get into this for people who haven't got the Bible languages. Because it talks about thou, which is you singular. It's a bit, if you did French, it's like tu, you singular. And then you've got the ye, or you. That's the plural, the vous in French. And of course, we address God as thou, because that's the singular of intimacy. Just like in a family in French, it's tu, you use with the family. Thou is getting to call God our Father. It's not the formality. I was wrongly taught that as a child. We address God as thou because this is the, addressing God as the reverent one. No, that would be vous. That's what, by the way, what French Catholics, I believe, do. French Protestants always pray to God as tu. I may be wrong that. I've got an expert in French. There you are. I'm going back memory here for many a long year. But that's the point. This is the singular and the plural, and how we can learn. All of you, that's the main point. You, is it singular, just me, or is it you altogether? How can we help one another? Of course we need our personal, private, devotional life. Time alone with Jesus, day by day, is the best way to do it. But there is collective impact when we are doing this, when we are helping one another. That's why we need to meet and not give up meeting together week by week. We need to do this. And it's so important. Yes, obviously, it helps if you've got someone who's teaching the Bible faithfully. That's part of this. But the sharing times, whether that's in a small group or round the Lord's table, are really important, because this is how we share and build one another up with what we're learning, so that we will be a community of disciples. You see, Jesus is the preeminent light of the world, as we read in John 8. How do we become light to the world? Well, it's a bit like he's the sun and we're moons. And if we pick up his light, we can be lights to the world because it's reflecting his light, becoming like him. Here's how one of Jesus' early followers, the Apostle Paul, puts it. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault, in a warped and crooked generation. That whole idea of being children of God, bearing the family likeness. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life, or as you hold out the word of life. It could mean either. But as we hold on to and hold out this word of life, we can shine as stars in the sky. That's what Jesus wants us to get, first of all, who we are, rather than what we do, and the change he wants to bring in us. I'll leave these couple of thoughts up here so that we can just maybe spend a few minutes talking about them, and then we can pray in this whole area. What does this mean for us? Just two thoughts. How does our church programme at Hillbank help us to be effective as salt and light? That's, because if it's not doing that, there's something wrong. And that could be something wrong with us, or it could be something wrong with what we're doing. But we want to be effective as salt and light. How does what we do together help us to do that? And how could we develop what we do together to help one another follow Jesus as his disciples? And if you've got thoughts, please share them. I know that the elders have been spending a lot of time thinking about this. They'll be sharing some of that with you. But this is a two-way conversation. So if there are things that you think would make church life at Hillbank more fruitful, more effective in us becoming disciples so that we can help others become disciples, this is a great time to be talking about it, because God gives his mind to us all. We each have his Spirit. We're each reading the same Bible, and if you've got thoughts, please share them.